Hello everyone, welcome to a new oXygen webinar. My name is George Bina and I will host today's webinar. I invited my colleague Octavian to present you the XSLT debugging and profiling support that we provide in oXygen, as well as XSLT unit testing. Our agenda today starts with an introduction, then a quick overview of the XSLT webinars. This is the third webinar in a series of 3 webinars on XSLT support in oXygen. After that, Octavian will show you how you can debug, spot and fix performance issues, and how you can create and run unit tests for your XSLT style sheets. At the end, we will have a dedicated questions and answers section, and we will end with an overview of upcoming events where you can meet us. You do not need to wait for the dedicated questions and answers section at the end of the webinar. You can ask questions at any time during the webinar. A few of my colleagues are also online. They joined the webinar and we will answer questions, as I said, anytime you ask them. To ask questions, please use the questions panel in your GoToWebinar interface, or if you prefer to use Twitter, then mark your questions with the Oxygen XML hashtag so we can easily spot them. Before we begin, we have a couple of questions for you. The first question is whether you use oXygen, if you use oXygen for XSLT development. And the possible answers are yes, version 15, yes, but an older version, no, I use a different tool, and the last option is I'm not an XSLT developer. We'll leave this open for a few more seconds, so you all get a chance to cast your vote. I think we can close this now. Okay, and let's share the results. So a good number of participants are using the latest oXygen version, and 40% I see that are using an older version of oXygen. Few of you are using a different tool for XSLT development, so we hope to convince you to switch to oXygen today. And another number are not XSLT developers, so you will just get an idea of what oXygen can do for XSLT. And the second question is, how do you debug your XSLT style sheets? And here you can choose multiple answers. First one is if you use an XSLT debugger, then you may use XSL message to log different messages in your style sheet and then look to see what messages appear. Another option is, if you just make changes, run the transformation, look at the results, make other changes, run the transformation again and look at results. And the last option is if you do not debug your XSLT style sheets. Okay, so this has an interesting result. I will close this now and let's share the results. So only a third are using a debugger. A good number also are using XSL message. And a lot of people are actually just making changes and looking at the results. So maybe Octavian will show you that using the debugger can be really useful in some cases and will speed up your development. Let's move on to my next slide, which is an overview of the XSLT webinars. We split these XSLT webinars in 3 parts. The first and second parts were recorded and they are available from our website. We have an events section and you can find these recordings and entries for these past webinars in the past events section. Not only the recording is available, but also the sample files that were used for those webinars. And we'll do the same for today's webinar. In the first webinar, we covered the core XSLT support, editing, validation, applying XSLT transformations. In this part, we used only one style sheet. Then in the second webinar, we moved to using multiple style sheets and to discover how oXygen can help you when you have many modules and that are interconnected. This second webinar covered also refactoring actions, applying changes on multiple files, like renaming, for instance, a component in all your files. It provided an insight into your style sheet hierarchy and dependencies between style sheet components, for example, where a function is used from. As well as we showed how to generate Java doc-like documentation for XSLT style sheets. Now we will focus on debugging to find and fix issues, profiling to find and fix performance problems, and unit testing to make sure that the behavior of your style sheets remain correct even when you make some changes in different parts of your XSLT style sheets. So now it's time to change and make Octavian presenter so he can start his presentation. Octavian, here you go.
Hello everybody, my name is Octavian. I'm a member of the oXygen team for almost 10 years now, for those who don't know me yet from the other conferences or webinars. And I'm mostly involved in the XML developing part in oXygen. This is the third webinar for the XSLT development with oXygen, and we'll focus on the debugging, profiling, and unit testing features. So in order to see these features in oXygen, I made a simple example. We have an XML file that contains a list of books, a list of recommended books. It's the same XML file that we used in the previous webinars, and also an XSL file that generates an HTML report with this list of books. So let's switch to oXygen and see these two files. So this is the XML files, books XML, and has this list of books. Each book has a title, then an author, an image, and a description of the book. And this book also the same information. And books XSL process the books and generates an HTML report with the books, matches the books root, and generates an HTML. Then for each book from the XML generates a row in a table. On the first column it's an image, and on the second column the title, the author, and a description. And at the end I added some related books. These are the books with the same technology as the current book that are in my document. Let's make a transformation and see the result. So this is the HTML. So in order to find and fix different problems in my style sheet, I need to use the XSLT debugging perspective. This helps me to visualize the context of the processor, see the variables from the context. I can use the stack windows and the other helpers to find the problems in my style sheet. So let's switch to oXygen. In order to switch to the debugging perspective, you can use the XSLT Debugger button from the toolbar. Click on it. Automatically, when you switch to the XSLT Debugger perspective, the XML files and XSL are added side by side. In the left side, we have the XML files, and in the right side, we have the XSL files. Also, the result pane, it's in the right here. You can choose the XML file that you want to use as input from this combo, and I want to use the books XML as input. Then from here you can choose the style sheet that you want to debug. Here you can specify the output in case you want to save the result in a specific file. I'll just preview the result in this area, so I don't need to set a result file here. Then you can specify parameters. These are the parameters from my style sheet, and I can set them values, but I don't need to set this. Here you can set extensions in case you use extensions, then turn on the profiling. Then you can enable the HTML output in case you want to view the result and preview the result as HTML also. And this turns off the output source mapping view. So we can see here in the bottom, the view appeared. This will present information about the current instruction. So presents a breadcrumb with all the XSL instructions from the style sheet entry point to the current instruction. I'll show you an example later. Then we can configure the XSLT transformer. oXygen provides support for the mostly used XSLT transformers. Salon, Saxon 6, Saxon Home Edition, Personal Edition, and Enterprise Edition. oXygen also offers full control over the debugging process by providing actions like step into, step over, step out, run to cursor, or run to end. You can pause the debugging, or you can stop the debugging process. Let's run the debugging on the two files that I selected. I'll go step by step, and you can see that the XML node and the XSL instruction are selected as I go step by step, and also I can preview in the results view here how the output is created as I go step by step. We can see that also oXygen goes into the XPath expressions. So if I go now with a step in, we see that it goes also, and you can debug also XPath expressions. And in the stack, we see that we are now in a function call. I'll go further. And if I go in the context window, we see that the current, we see the context, XML context, and we see the book that is processed now. Let's generate the image now, and then the title, and we see also that variables are presented in the variables view. So you have the variables from the current context. Also the stack view helps you to visualize a breadcrumb with all the instruction from the style sheet entry point to the current instruction that it's selected, and you can go back. You also have in this view the current node that is processed. The trace view presents information about the about how the processor evolved during my debugging process. So, and in the templates view, you can see the templates that are matched until now, and you can make an idea about what templates are used. If I run this until the end, we can see the result in the result pane with all the books and also the templates that are matched in the templates view. This is a name template, this is a template with match, and you can see the total number of hits for each template, and you can make an idea about how the process evolved. So in order to fix and find problems in your style sheet, you need to use the debugger perspective. This helps you to visualize the context of the processor and see the parameters and the variables from the context. You can see the trace, and you can easily go back and find out from where an output is generated. oXygen offers support for the mostly used XSLT processors. Also, you can debug style sheets version 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0. Next, let's see how we can save a debugging configuration in case you want to reuse it later for debugging the same style sheet with the same input. So in order to save the debugging configuration, you need to create a transformation scenario. I'll switch to the editor perspective now and use the create configure transformation scenario button from the toolbar. I will create a new transformation scenario, XSLT transformation. I'll select the XML file that I want to use as input, so it's the books XML. Then the XSL file, which is the books XSL. I can set the transformer that I want to use in the debugging and transformer. I will use the Saxon Personal Edition for my scenario. Then I can set the parameters for the debugging, and these are the parameters from the style sheet, and I'll change one value. I'll set this to false, for example. Okay. Then for more complex transformation, you can set also extension, additional style sheets. You can define an output where the results to be saved. I want to preview just my results, so I don't need to set an output. I will just use the preview. I'll save this scenario. And then now when I want to debug my style sheet, I just need to use the debug scenario button from the toolbar. And when you click this, automatically you go to the debugger perspective. The XML and the XSL files from the scenario are automatically selected in the combos. Also, in case you have an output, the output will be set here. If we go to the parameters dialog, we see that the parameters that we set in the scenario are automatically set in the debugging. So the processor also is set here, so it's easy to restore a debugging configuration every time you want to debug the style sheet and to save your debugging environment. This scenario is saved in project or in your global option, so you can share also with your team. And I'll hit run and just run the transformation and debug my style sheet. So you can use the debug scenario in order to save your configuration. You can use the same scenario also to transform and obtain an output. You can reuse the debugging environment every time you want to debug your style sheet. Let's see now how we can determine what expression generated a particular output and how this can help us to fix different problems in our style sheet. Let's switch to oXygen. So when you click in the output, oXygen automatically selects the XML node that generated the output and the XSL instruction that generated this output. So we can easily find from where an instruction is generated. If I go to publisher, we see that the publisher element is selected here in the XML, and the publisher template it's selected here in the XSL, so it's easy to find from where an output is generated. Also, the output mapping stack is it's synchronized with this selection. So if I go here on this output, also this output mapping stack helps me to visualize from where the output node was generated, and I can go back on the trace and find out from where this is generated. So the output mapping stack presents a breadcrumb from the current instruction, from the style sheet entry point to the current instruction. I noticed that in my output, the paperback pages are bolded here. So I want to fix this problem. I want only the paperback label to be bolded. So I will click on it, and automatically takes me to the instruction that generated this output. And I see that the bold is not set correctly here. And I will cut the end tag from here, and I will make only the paperback label as bold. I will save my style sheet, and I will execute the debug again, and I see that now the paperback pages are correctly rendered in the output. So it's easy to find a problem in your output, and then mapping it into the style sheet. You can fix it easily. So the output to source mapping helps you to easily find out from where an output is generated. The output mapping stack view helps you to visualize from where that instruction was generated, showing you a breadcrumb from the style sheet entry point to that instruction, and you can go back. Next, let's see how we can use breakpoints in order to find different problems in our style sheet. So a breakpoint is used to pause the debugging process and analyze the debugging context in that place. If I go at the beginning of my output, I see that for each book I have some related books printed after the current book, and I've noticed that the link to the rendering of the book is not correct. Here should be the title of the related book, but it's something like effective_XML and is not correct. If I click on it, I see that the related book is this one, and the title should be this one. And instead of the title, it's something else rendered. If I look in my style sheet, the instruction that generated this output, I see that is the value of the book title parameter. And I will add a breakpoint here in order to analyze the context and find out what is the problem. To add a breakpoint, you just need to click on the stripe, and the breakpoint is added here. Then I run the debugger, and the debugger stops at this breakpoint. Also highlights the XML node and the XSL instruction that is correct. It's currently processed, and I can analyze the context of the debugger. I can see in the variables view in the bottom the variables from the context. In the context view, I can see the current node that is processed, and I can see that is the book, and see the title of the book, that is this one. In order to find out the value of the book title parameter, I can select it and right click on it and use the watch expression action from the contextual menu. This automatically adds the selected expression in the Xwatch window, and I can see the value of the parameter. Double clicking on it, it presents me the current node in the node set window, and I can see that the value of the parameter, it's the anchor attribute with the value effective XML. So it seems that the title is not correctly set in my template. So to find out from where this title is set, I can use the stack and go back and see on the trace from where this parameter is set, and I see that it's a parameter on the create index item template, and I can see that this template was called from here when the related books are processed. And if I look at the value of the parameter, I notice that the value is wrong set. So here should be the title instead of the anchor. So I'll correct this. I'll delete the content. We see that you need to stop the debugging process when you make a modification in the style sheet. And I will stop it and then correct the value of the book title parameter. Then I will save the style sheet and run again the debugging process. The debugger stops again at the breakpoint that I added, and I can see the value of the book title parameter changed now, and it's the title value. So now I can remove the breakpoint. You can remove a breakpoint just by clicking on it, or you can remove it from the breakpoints view from here using the contextual menu. Also, you can disable a breakpoint in case you want to use it later using the contextual menu. On the breakpoint, you can say disable breakpoint, and it's marked with gray, and it's not used by the debugger anymore, but you can enable it or disable it when you want to use it. Also, you can enable it or disable it from the breakpoints view. Now I run the debugger until the end, and the output is generated. And now the related books title are generated correctly in my output. You can see that for each book are generated correctly. Another problem that I found in my output is that, for example, for this book, the date is not set correctly, so has a tree here added in the output. And in order to find out from where this is generated, we can see that this is generated by the date template, and this uses the getDate function to generate the output. And this formats the date node that gets as input. And if you look in the XML file, we see that the date element contains a wrong date here. So I need to correct this. But I want to make sure that there are not other dates in my XML file that are incorrect. And for this, I want to add a breakpoint, but this time I want to add a conditional breakpoint and stop the debugger only if the date is not set correctly. So oXygen has these conditional breakpoints that contains that allows you to add a breakpoint with by specifying an XPath expression that returns a Boolean value. To add a conditional breakpoint, you need to go to the breakpoints view and use the contextual menu and then add. I will set that I want a conditional breakpoint only, and I want to stop the debugging process every time the date, the year from the date is not set correctly. So for this, I will use the year from date function. And as parameter, I will give the date parameter of the function, so the date node. And I want to stop the debugger process every time the year is higher than the current year in order to correct the year in my file. Okay, to add the breakpoint. Then now if I run the debugger, I see that when the condition is met, the debugger stops. A marker is placed on the left, and the XML node is selected, and also the XSL instruction. And I can see that for the Dogbook XSL book, the date is not set correctly. The year it's higher than 2013. So I'll correct this. I will stop the debugger, then save the file and run it again to find out if there are other dates set incorrect. The debugger stops again. So the condition is met also for the Web Service Essentials book. And I'll correct this date also. In order to make the modification, I'll stop the debugger, then save the file, and then I'll run it again. And we see that the debugger execution finished. The condition is not met anymore, so now I'm sure that the year is set correctly for all my books. So the publishing date is not higher than 2013. Also, the debugging view helps you to manage the breakpoints. These breakpoints are saved in the options, so you can use it every time you want, and you can just disable it and use it next time when you want to debug the style sheet. Also on the contextual menu you have different actions like add, edit, remove breakpoints, enable them all, or remove them all. You can edit the XPath expression directly in the table in case you want to add a breakpoint to the condition. So we see that you can use the breakpoints view in order to manage the breakpoints from your document. The breakpoints are persistent. I saved in options, and you can use it next time. You just need to enable it and disable it when you don't want to use it. You can use conditional breakpoints if you want to stop the debugging process when a condition is met. The conditional XPath expressions, so it's any XPath expression that returns a Boolean value. The conditions are evaluated at each step in the debugging process. Next, let's see how we can find performance problems in our style sheet using the XSLT profiler. So in order to enable the profiling, you need to turn on the profiling support from this button here on the toolbar. When you click on it, automatically the invocation tree and the hotspots view are presented in the bottom part. This collects information about the profiling. I created a bigger file in order to profile the style sheet, the books multiple XML. This contains the same books, but I copied and pasted for many times to make a bigger file here. And I'll use this as input. And to start the profiling, I just need to run. The views collect information about the profiling, both the invocation tree and the hotspots. And when the debugging ends, presents the information, we see that the total time to process the XML file was over 8 seconds. And we can see in the invocation tree all the instruction in a top-down manner and the time for each instruction to be executed and the total time. So we can notice that, for example, for this instruction to be executed, were used 4 milliseconds, 18 times was invoked during the transformation. This is the total time and the percent from the total time. So we can easily find the problems using the invocation tree. Also in the hotspots view, you can see the instruction that took a longer time to be executed. and you can see from where these instructions were called. So these are the problems, the performance problems here. And if I look at this instruction, I can see that when the related books are processed, then I iterated all the books from my document and I printed the books with the same technology as the current book technology. So I want to make this run faster. For this, I will use a key and I will map all the books with the same technology. I will add a key here after the template. Let's insert an XSL key, set the name of the key, books by technology. Then the key should match the book elements, and the key for the book should be the technology attribute. Now, instead of iterating all the books from the document, I'll use the key function. I need to set the name of the key that I want to use here. So booked by technology, the key that I already created, and I want to obtain all the keys, all the books that has the same technology as my current book. So I'll use the parameter group current technology, and then I don't need this check here because I already got the books with the current technology. So I'll remove it from here, and automatically also the end tag removed. So first time it was 8 seconds. Let's see now what happens if I use the XSL key. And now it seems that the time was improved. Now are 2 seconds. So using the XSL key is more faster than iterating all the books. And we can find also other problems if we want and fix other and make the style sheet run faster. Also, you can export the invocation tree and the hotspots to the XML and or HTML format. You can do this by right click on the view and use the export action from the contextual menu. I'll export it to HTML. You need to set a name of the HTML file where the result will be saved. Let's say invocation. The result, it's open in the edit in the browser, and you can see the time when the profiling was made, the engine, the files that I used for the profiling, the total time, and you can analyze the profiling, the invocation tree in the browser. You can share it with your team, or you can analyze it later if you want. Also, the hotspots view can be exported to HTML or XML using the contextual menu, export to XML. I'll export this also. Save the result, and these are the hotspots. Also, you have the time, the files, and the hotspots from your profiling, and you can analyze this later. So in order to find different performance problems in your style sheet, you can use the XSLT profiler. The invocation tree presents you the time for each instruction in a top-down manner, and you can easily find out the problems that occurred in your style sheet. Also, in the hotspots view, you can visualize the instructions from your style sheet that took a longer time to be executed, and you can fix them. Next, we'll see how you can test your style sheet using the unit testing support that oXygen provides. We are using the XSpec framework for testing. Before I present this, George has a question for you.
Thank you,
Related.
Octavian. Let me ask this question. So this is, do you unit test your XSLT style sheets? And as possible answers, you have, yes, I use XSpec integrated in oXygen. Yes, I use XSpec, but outside of oXygen. Yes, I use a different unit testing framework. No, and the last option is no, what is unit testing? That's, in case you are not familiar with unit testing, and in that case, Octavian probably has to say a few words about unit testing and how that is useful. Okay, let me close this and share the results. And the results are that people are not actually really using unit testing for XSLT, and many of you do not know about unit testing. So unit testing is very common in the Java and C development world, where you want to test little parts of your code, so that when something breaks, you don't get that your application doesn't behave correctly. You just you can localize the part that breaks to a specific part of your application, right? So that's you basically, we have two types of tests: the black box test that test the whole application from start to end, and unit tests that test little parts of your application. And the advantage, as I said, is that when you test, when you run these unit tests, then you get a very localized area in your application that is responsible for that failure. Okay, let me hide this and allow Octavian to continue with his presentation for unit testing for XSLT style sheets.
Okay, thank you, George. So let's see how we can create a unit testing scenario, and I'll explain how you can test your style sheet. I'll switch to oXygen, then I'll switch to the editor perspective. In order to create a test case scenario for a style sheet, you can go to the File, New, then select from here the XSL unit test. Then you need to customize this. In this page, you can select the style sheet that you want to add test cases for, and the style sheet for my demo is the Books XML style sheet, XSL style sheet. Automatically, when you select the style sheet, the templates, the name templates and the match templates from the style sheet are added in the table below, and also the functions. And you can easily select the functions and the templates that you want to add test cases for. You can select it from here. Then after you select the function and the templates, you need to create the test case scenario. An XSpec file is created, and for each template and function, a scenario is created. This one. And in order to implement a scenario, for example, I'll implement a test case for the getDate function. You need to remove the pending attribute from the scenario. Then you need to specify the input and the expected results from this function. So this function gets a date as input. I'll set the value of the parameter. Let's say 2006 0612. Then, as expected, I expect to be a text that should look like this: June 12, 2006. I also can set a message for the expected result. So let's say the date BRN. The date should be rendered correctly. Then I will save the test case. I need to set a name. Let's say books test case. I will save the file. Then to run the test case, you just need to go to the apply scenario button from here and click on it, and the test case runs. And you get an HTML report with you can see here the style sheet that is tested and the test cases from your file. The test cases that are not implemented yet are marked with this label, and we can see here the scenario that I implemented for the get date, and we see that it fails. So failed because the result from the style sheet was this one, June 12, 2006, and I expected to be without a comma, so I forgot to add the comma in my test case, and I'll correct it. I'll go back to oXygen and I'll also the comma here and save. Then I run it again, and now the test case passed. Let's implement another test case, for example, for the create index item template. So if I go to the books style sheet, let's see how the create index item template looks like. So this template generates an index item, gets an anchor, a title, and an author, and generates a paragraph with an anchor. Then the value of the anchor is the title, and then after that it's an italic with the author. So let's implement a test case for this template. I'll remove the pending attribute. Then I'll set some values as input. Let's say book anchor here. Then book title and book author. Then for the expected, to speed up a little bit, I already created a test case for this. So the expected should be a paragraph with an anchor, and then the title, an italic with a book author. So I'll just copy the expected result from here and paste it in my test case here. Then I'll save this and run the test case. So we see that the two test cases that I created now passed. So if someone makes a modification, for example, in my style sheet and breaks it, for example, if I go to the style sheet and instead of book author, someone uses the book anchor by mistake, and in the getDate function, someone removes the year from the formatting date. Now, if I run my test case, I'm sure that the test case will fail, and I'll find out that there is a problem in my style sheet. So I run the test case, and we see that the two test cases that I created failed, and I click on the first one, and we see that the result from the style sheet was this one, and the book author is not set correctly. So here is the book anchor, and the expected result was with the book author. So I can go in my style sheet and find out what is the problem there and who modified my style sheet. And the second test case also has as result only June 12th, and I expected to be June 12, 2006. So it's easy to find out the problems because you test simple parts from your style sheet, and you can easily find out where are the problems in your style sheet when someone modified the output. So oXygen provides XSLT unit testing support. This is based on XSpec. You can read more about how to write a scenario, a test case scenario on the Google Code page. I'll share these slides with you, and you'll get a link there. oXygen helps you to easily create a scenario by providing a user dialog and presents all the templates and the functions from your style sheet, and you can easily select the style sheet, the templates that you want to add test cases for, and you can run it and get easily a result. So thank you very much for watching. If you have any questions that you didn't ask yet during the webinar, you can ask them now. George will read some of the questions that you already added. Thank you.
Thank you, Octavian. We received quite a good number of questions, and let me try to go through some of them. The first question was whether the unit testing part requires a unit testing framework, and you already answered. It's XSpec that we are using in oXygen. oXygen basically just integrates XSpec to provide user-friendly and support for easily creating the test cases and running them. And another question also a couple of questions related to this, where if this is proprietary to oXygen, and if the unit tests can be run also in an automated way. And it is not proprietary, as Octavian presented earlier. It's an open source project available on Google Code, and you can take that and use it also in an automated script. Okay, another question was related to finding modes. So how you can find the template with a given mode, and one option is maybe I should try to make myself a presenter for a minute. So one option for that is to use the search. Like here we have a mode, and it's used here. You can use search references also on modes, so that will give you all the hits, all the templates or apply templates that use that mode. Another option is to use the outline to filter like this, and this will select that the templates that match that mode. Another question was, is the debugger tool new to version 15, or it is available also in older version? The XSLT debugger is available in older versions. In the last version, in version 15, there are no big changes to the debugging support, only that we updated Saxon, and automatically we also updated basically the XSLT3 support that Saxon provides. While single stepping in debug, can you step backwards or go to a previous line and continue forward? No, the debugger does not move back. You can only move forward with the debugger. Are breakpoints saved? Yes, the breakpoints are persistent, so you will find them also in your next session. Fixing output generated by XSLT is easy, but how do you debug a style sheet when no output is being generated? That's my most common problem. And my recommendation here would be to step through, add breakpoints, and also use maybe conditional breakpoints like Octavian presented, where you can, when you can stop when a specific condition that you write is true. Any recommendations for debugging within the context of data? That's not a very easy task because the Data Open Toolkit has a quite involved processing, but what you can do basically is to configure the Data Open Toolkit to leave the temporary files. Then you can open those files in the oXygen debugger and see what's going on. I have also some ideas, like we provide, for instance, for mallogic, what we call remote debugging support, intercepting basically a request that is not started from the debugger, but from the application. So we have some ideas, but that's not very easy to implement. Does the output mapping stack show which nodes were output by the built-in XSLT templates? Or does it only show those that are explicitly defined in the XSLT style sheet? We show only templates that are explicitly defined in the style sheet. If you want to see the built-in templates, then you can put them, you can find them in the specification. You can just put them in a style sheet and import that style sheet from the, let's say, last level of import in your style sheets. And then you will see also the built-in template rules. Okay. Another question was about the outline, what files are visible in the outline. The outline presents all the files reachable from the current file by default, but if you define the master files, then the outline will show all the files reachable from the master files that include the current module. If you want to learn more about master files, you can see the recording of our second webinar where we covered this subject. Okay. Okay, can you indicate on a feature exclusive to oXygen 15? As I said, there are no specific XSLT debugging features added in version 15. Search declaration could search modes too. It does actually, as I presented earlier. I would love to reuse conditional breakpoints. Is there a way to delete the ones I don't think I'll need again? Of course, you can either disable a breakpoint, so you don't want that to be active, but you think that you will reuse that in the future, or you can delete a breakpoint if you don't need that anymore. Can a conditional breakpoint evaluate the right-hand value of a variable dynamically as it changes with the context? Or must the right-hand value be some kind of atomic or static value? The conditional breakpoint evaluates in every context that expression, and any part of that expression can be a variable or a dynamic expression. Can you use the debugger and profiler also for master files and various XSLT files that work together? Yes, in this example, Octavian presented only one XSLT style sheet, but the debugger works on complex style sheets that include import multiple modules, and the debugger will automatically go to the corresponding instruction within the corresponding module, within the XSLT module that um, contains that instruction. Okay. You knew to use XSL key to improve performance, but does the software make any suggestions on how to improve performance? No, the XSLT profiler does not make suggestions on how you can improve performance. It just shows you, where the time is spent, and then you can see that code and find out how you can rewrite that, if possible, to improve performance. It is true that in general for XSLT, in many cases, using a key will speed up. If you have an iteration, using a key will speed up processing. Does the debugger use any particular XSLT engine? We support for XSLT debugging Slalom and all version of Saxon, including Saxon 6 and the latest Saxon 9, Home Edition, Professional Edition, and Enterprise Edition. Okay. Can you run XSpec outside of oXygen? I covered this initially. Yes, it is an open source project and you can use it outside of oXygen, and you can also run automated tests in a script if you want. And now we still have more questions. So basically the webinar ended, the time allocated for the webinar ended, but I will continue to read some of the questions. From which oXygen version is unit testing available? And I see that one of my colleagues responded that unit testing is available starting with version 14. You can also, we have a very interesting page on our website called History. So if you go on our website, and we have this history page, history.html page, where you can see all the oXygen history, all the releases, and then when you click on a version, then you will see what happened, what new additions were added in that version. In version 14, you see XSLT unit test support was added in this version. Could you please provide a bit of information about debugging an XSLT that uses extensions? You can define, you can specify extension libraries in transformation scenarios, or in the transformation scenario, or also in the debugger. I think you have an, maybe Octavian can show that if I make him presenter again. Maybe you can show where someone can set a library with an extension library in the debugger,
Yes,
and in the transformation scenario.
Yes, in the debugger perspective, you have this button on the toolbar, and you can edit the extensions here, and here you can add the extensions. This is the dialog that allows you to add the extensions here, and the same dialog is in the scenarios. So if you go to the edit, to the configure transformation scenario, and you edit a scenario or you create a new one, you have the extensions here, this button, and the same dialog is presented, and here you can add the extensions that you want to use.
Can you explain the difference between step into, step over, and step out? I often find that these do the same thing in the context I'm debugging. do you want to take this, Octavian? Or so step
So
step into it. It runs each instruction step by step, basically going into each and every instruction. Step over means that if the current instruction is like a, let's say, a call template, it will not go inside that call template. It will move to the same instruction at the same level as the current instruction. So it will step over the content of that instruction, basically. And step out will uh, go up one level. So let's say if you stepped into the call template and then you want to move away from that template, then you can use step out to move uh, to the instruction after the call template. Um, hope that.
this is the run to cursor.
How do you create the template for XSpec? Could it be used to analyze code completeness? Could it be used to analyze code completeness? How do you create a template for XSpec? So you create
You just need to use the wizard dialog. I think it's helpful. New, and then you select the style sheet that you want to create the test cases for.
yes, and
And
about
this
the code completeness, that probably refers to code coverage, basically. So you can, you know, if you have a series of tests, you want to see if all the templates, let's say, were tested, or all the templates or the functions from your XSLT style sheet were hit, basically. I think that Xproc has a feature request, but I don't think that code coverage is provided now by the XSpec report. You have also some information in the debugger when you see the number of hits of each template, or when after you run a debugging session, but code coverage is not yet provided as a report right now. Again, I think it's a feature request also for XSpec. I've noticed that sometimes the debugger doesn't allow me to inspect the code text for a few lines. I've been told that this is when there is no step, code step, uh, even though there are multiple lines in the XSLT. I guess this is because of how the XSLT processor compiles the XSLT. Sometimes this makes it quite difficult to see where things are going wrong. Uh, am I understanding the problem correctly? Is there any workaround? Yes, for example, there are a number of optimizations made by XSLT processors, like lazy evaluations of variables. So you may see a variable defined and you specify a value, but the debugger will know, it will not immediately go into evaluating that variable when the variable is defined. However, when the variable is used for the first time, then you'll notice that the debugger will switch to the expression that computes that variable value. Uh, this is how the XSLT processor behaves, and this is what oXygen can and has to show. We cannot show something different than the current XSLT processor state. So uh, of course, these optimizations change the source from the actual XSLT processor behavior, and sometimes it is not that easy to see what's going on. But there are no, you know, really good solutions. The only thing is that to make sure that you turn the optimization level on Saxon to the lowest level, so that you don't get all possible optimizations. Can the debugger be configured to work with other processors? No, only the processors that the debugging support is there's no common interface like for XML parsing or for transformations for XSLT debugging. So we had to build a specific support for each processor. So the debugging cannot work with any processor. Can a breakpoint be set on an XSL variable? Yes, that should be possible. Someone says that he remembers that XSpec has a code coverage feature already, but it requires Saxon Enterprise Edition. Then we will have to make a note and look into this, because oXygen includes Saxon Enterprise Edition, so we should be able to provide that then in oXygen. Probably we need to put a stop to this webinar now, and there are just a couple of questions that we will follow up after the webinar with responses, so do not worry if your question was not answered. We will follow up and provide answers to all the questions. You can meet us at a couple of upcoming conferences. We will be at Balisage in Montreal, as I said, at the beginning of August. Then you can meet us at TCOM, TC World in Germany, and also at DITA Europe. We have plans to have many new webinars. They are not yet scheduled, but you can check out our events page on our website, and we have also a news feed on our website, so you can be informed if you want to join us another time. Thank you again, and thank you, Octavian, for your nice presentation, and we hope to see you again at one of our upcoming webinars, or meet you at one of these conferences we plan to participate to. Goodbye.